Hi, and welcome to week 4 lecture for Cultural Perspectives Online. I'm Dr. Evvie Smith, and this week's topic is on power. Now, we hear this word power quite a lot throughout our lives, but do we actually know what it is and how it functions over us? So, to start with, we're going to do a little bit of a review of last week's topic, but then we're going to move into defining what is power, what does power have to do with culture, and what are some examples of how culture influences culture itself. So last week, we used 3 theoretical perspectives to understand what is the self. And those 3 perspectives were Maslow, Freud, and Mead. Now, Maslow looked at the hierarchy of needs in terms of human longing, belonging, the certain things that we look for in life in order to feel this holistic self, in order to feel like we are a human, that we belong in society, and some of those basic necessities. We also looked at Freud and his understandings of psychoanalysis and how 90% of what we want or what we desire or our subconscious is actually below the surface. And if you think about that iceberg analogy, only 10% of what we really feel and what we really want and desire is shown to the rest of the world, which is above the water. So Freud's psychoanalysis is really kind of interesting in terms of understanding how we have those Freudian slips, as he calls them, throughout life. And we might call our boyfriend by our ex-boyfriend's name, or we might call our teacher mum, or something like that. All of those sorts of things are Freudian slips, and they tell us about people's desires, people's unconscious, and then therefore what our self is made up of. And we also looked at Mead and the different stages of human identity development. And we looked at those in terms of childhood stages and kind of how people do role play and, play around with identities and experiment by putting on costumes and putting on different performances, and we know what are involved in those performances by actually playing them out and by actually living them. So we know what a doctor should be like, or we know how society constructs what women should be like or what men should be like, and that is all kind of figured out through our performances and our kind of testing out of those things. So we also looked at Western perspectives of the self and our lived reality, and that we always understand ourselves to be kind of free or, free individuals, but we are actually constrained by our culture through things such as norms, values, and expectations. So although we like to think we are free and individual, which is a very Western notion, Eastern or Oriental societies don't share that same view. Often their societies are built on communalism or, doing something for the greater good. But in Western society, where the birth of individualism took place, we like to see ourselves as free agents. We all want to get the best education. We all want to get the best job that we can, and that we are ultimately free, but we are not really. We are always constrained by norms, values, and expectations that are constructed and made up by society in order to inflict or to kind of keep people in their certain place. So what is power? So according to Johnson in the Blackwell Dictionary of Sociology, sociologists understand power in different ways and often disagree about how it should be defined. So there are many different views on power, and the view that I take as a sociologist is largely based on Foucault's understanding of power as existing everywhere and therefore nowhere specifically. But if we look at some common definitions, starting with Max Weber, who is obviously this man here on our right, very famous sociologist. He says that power is the ability to control others, events, or resources, and to make happen what one wants to happen in spite of obstacles, resistance, or opposition. Now, this is a really important thing to remember, because where there is power, there is always resistance, okay, or counter-resistance. So often when people exert power over us, we like to fight back. We like to, kind of resist that power. And you often see that classic example between children and parents, school teachers and students. So power doesn't always exist unchallenged or kind of on its own. It always does meet these obstacles and resistance and opposition. So we can think of this as a kind of power over people. Now, another alternative understanding of this definition is that there is this kind of power over conception, and power can also be used in more subtle and indirect ways where it's not so clear upon us. So if we think about this, this includes the ability to not act. So as when a parent withholds love from a child, or when a government withholds financial support from certain minority groups or from the poor, that is also exercising power, not enacting laws, not protecting people, not ensuring that certain groups of people have protection. That is also a power as well. So not acting or not doing things for people can also act as a form of power in a very subtle way, and the ability to shape people's beliefs and values. So as through control over mass media. So if we think about Rupert Murdoch, who owns, I think, roughly 60% of the news outlets in Australia, he has a massive influence on controlling what most people in this country think, what we see, what we feel. Okay, so he's a very powerful man. So things like mass media or even educational institutions. Okay, what we teach you, what you are being taught, shapes your ontological view of the world. It shapes who you are and what you think, and therefore we are exercising power over what you actually know. So these are subtle ways in which power can be exercised. Now, what does power have to do with culture? So in week 2, we define culture as, remember, the way of life. And I particularly like this definition because it talks about our whole society. So an entire society, and this includes codes of manners, dress, language, rituals, norms of behaviour and systems of belief. And that is from the text Jari and Jari that we looked at. Now, a way of life, culture encompasses everything, okay? So how we dress, the words that we use, how we act, and culture does not stay the same. And that's one thing that we need to take note of, is that culture is fluid. It is constantly changing, and therefore us as beings within that system or within culture are also changing as well. So it is a transactional kind of relationship that we have with culture. Culture influences us, but we too also shape and influence culture as well. So it is therefore fluid. So culture and power, they influence each other, okay? So culture creates and perpetuates powerful ideas, norms, trends, and morals. And think about the discussion we had on cultural conformity. Who conforms to certain things? Who challenges certain things? And why do we do this? Culture is so powerful because we are socialised into it. So we are socialised beings. We don't exist the way we are because out of nowhere, or we want to be individuals. Although we might dress and look as individuals, sometimes we are picking from scripts that society has already set out for us, what a man should be like or what a woman should be like and what we should wear and how we should act. Although we might go against that, sometimes we are still picking from scripts, and a limited number of scripts that are out there already in society. So we are always surrounded by it, and it is usually comfortable and it's usually easy for us. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind. Why is it normally comfortable or easy? Because most people conform to social, cultural norms, values, and meanings. So these are just some little images I've got here about eating, about going to the toilet, about having coffee with friends, getting married. And so what are some of the things that you do simply because culture says so? So I want you to think about that, bring your ideas to class, and we can discuss that a little bit further. But I just wanted to pop that in there for a bit of a kind of reflection moment where you can think about what you do and why you do it. And often people do things because they are told to. Now, some influences, power influences culture. So as an ability to shape beliefs and values, power can be a type of influence, and this can come from a number of sources, such as individuals, so your parents, your friends, corporations, okay, such as big businesses, wealthy capitalists that employ you and keep you in a job, governments that sort of, implement laws, rules, religious institutions as well. A lot of people are governed by religious morals, religious kind of doctrines, and often go about day to day, or their daily lives are actually structured around religious rules and expectations, militaries, gangs, for example, and even students. Okay, so influence can be exerted in a number of ways, and we look next at how each of these groups can exert or influence or can exert influence on culture. So examples of power as cultural influence. So individuals influence based on charisma or aggression, for example. People can be quite aggressive. People with force or with that can dominate conversation can often influence certain things, or who are charismatic or interesting or flamboyant. Okay, so all of these things can be used as tools by people to influence certain things. So we have very famous people like Steve Jobs. We have Ellen DeGeneres. We've got famous soccer players. All these sorts of people can influence our world because of their personalities and because they carry weight, therefore, in what they say. Corporations based on economic power, okay, so including branding. So if you look at the top, I think it's the top 40 corporations in the world, or successful corporations, 2/3 of those, or a majority of those are actually from the United States. Okay, so we have number one as being Apple. Okay, then we've got Samsung, Google, Microsoft, Verizon, AT&T, Amazon, GE. All of those are from the United States. Okay, so this is a sort of Americanization of our world, and we'll get to that in another topic. But you can see here that corporations with a lot of money can influence kind of, what products we have, what we use, what we need, which charities they might give to, and sort of these, therefore, economic power is a form of power, and it's usually held by large corporations. Governments influence power based on political authority and the law. Okay, so this is a little meme I've got here about Tony Abbott and a Muslim woman with her headdress and body covering. And it says here, "I find what you're wearing confronting." And obviously, I've got an image of Tony Abbott here and his budgie smugglers. So think about what our governments prescribe as being normal dress sense, or what we're allowed to wear or not allowed to wear, or what we're allowed to even do with our bodies. Another meme here, and then there was a change of government and climate change just went away. Hooray. So think about how when we had Julia Gillard and the previous Labor government that, was supportive of kind of the mining tax and the climate, sort of emissions trading schemes and stuff like that to reduce, pollution and environmental issues and stuff like that, which was then abolished or withdrawn once the Liberal government came in under Tony Abbott. So think about even our ideas about environment, about kind of, pollution stuff, how that is even changed just from second to second about who is in governance and who is controlling this country. Think about ideas about asylum seekers even, how we used to kind of think, no, they're not good, we need to push them away. Oh, no, we'll let them in. There's kind of different discussions or different ways in which people talk about asylum seekers now and the language that they use because of the government that is in at the time and the language that they use in the media and stuff like that. So it does influence our thought processes and our views as well. So just some memes that I've got about asylum seekers and kind of this view and this mantra from our Liberal government about them being, bad, or quite a negative spin upon them. And it's done in a way to build up their power support and to make them look as though they are protecting us from certain outsiders. And that is how they build their power base, by kind of presenting in that way that they will look after us, they will protect you if you give them their vote, if you give them your vote. And that is a very manipulative way of running politics in a country. Religious institutions influence based on traditional and spiritual authority. Okay, so we have the Pope. Okay, we've got the mosque at Mecca in Saudi Arabia. We've got kind of a Dalai Lama there. So all of those kind of spiritual and religious authorities and how they gain followers as well by kind of sort of tuning into people's wants and desires and needs for sort of salvation and stuff like that, and afterlife and being a good person. Military's influence based on the threat of violence and discourses of peacekeeping. Okay, so think about kind of how they present themselves as keeping the peace, as being the only body in a society that can, inflict punishment in a way and to use certain weapons and stuff like that. That automatically gives them a sense of control and power, but that they are the only people that are technically allowed to inflict violence upon a population. So we've got also gangs, so influence based on anti-authoritarian and sometimes intimidating forms of behaviour. So gangs have power as well, and that's represented through, might be tattoos on their hands, it might be represented through what they wear, how they act, who they talk to, and that can be quite intimidating because it's often presented as being anti-authoritarian. It is a resistance to power and to legitimate forms of power and control as well. And a lot of police and a lot of governments are quite scared of gangs because they do operate essentially outside of cultural norms or outside of society itself, thereby creating their own forms of hierarchy and control. We've got the rebels, bikie gangs, for example, Brothers for Life, those sorts of things. And students influence based on resistance or sometimes solidarity. Sometimes I walk into a lecture theatre and students will not be quiet. That is a form of resistance or challenge to my authority as a lecturer. And sometimes I have to wheel out the big guns in order to squash that solidarity or resistance. But students will sometimes do this because they may not like the content, they may find the content boring, they may find the lecturer boring, whatever it might be. But students also can enact change in institutions and, through feedback forms and stuff that we give you, and you might not like particular materials that we put up, we then therefore change our courses and our structure to their to cater towards those wants and desires and needs. So students can, despite being, I guess, you might feel that you are just a number in a system, you can also show resistance and solidarity and power in some forms as well. So I just want to sort of talk about this idea of power is everywhere. So Michel Foucault, who's a French philosopher, talks about this idea that power exists in every relationship, and power, therefore, is everywhere and therefore nowhere specifically. So it's very hard to pin down. Foucault does not talk about a top-down structure. So, governments over people, police over people, teachers over students. That is a very top-down understanding of power and hierarchy. What he looks at is the more subtle ways in which power operates between people. Okay, and how power shifts and changes from context to context. So as you can see from all of these examples, power operates at a level of society, and big institutions like governments and military obviously have power, but so do each of us as a collective and even on an individual level. So that is our topic for today. I hope you have enjoyed it. So please bring to class your ideas about how you fit in with power, how do you conform to cultural norms or social norms, or how do you resist social norms? And I'll see you in our Zoom tutorial and we can chat about this a little bit more. Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Evvie Smith, and it's been a pleasure to have you. Thanks.